I've got a few questions this week about how to use shirring elastic, so I thought I'd do this quick video to explain it to you. So no project in this one. I'll try and fit that in shortly and we'll maybe make a little girl's dress. But this is just a very quick video to explain to you what shirring elastic is, how to set up your sewing machine to use it, and the effect that it's going to create. So if you haven't heard of shirring before, you may have seen in clothing particularly rows and rows and rows of stitches that gather the fabric and make it elasticated, and you'll find that on little girls' dresses, on bodices on dresses, maybe around cuffs on blouses and dresses as well, and it's a really lovely effect, and it's actually quite easy to do. So you're going to use shirring elastic, which is this, which is a very fine elastic core, and then it's wrapped with a fibre. And it's very stretchy and it's very strong. And this is going to be used in the bottom bobbin of your sewing machine. So it doesn't matter whether your bobbin is a top loading or whether it's a front loading. It works in exactly the same way. You'll need to hand wind this. So don't use a bobbin winder on your sewing machine because it'll wind it far too tightly. And we don't want too much tension on this at all. So just take your time. You will need to fill a few bobbins, so I would suggest that if you have spare bobbins, fill about 3 or 4 before you start sewing, so you don't have to stop halfway through your project to rewind your bobbin up. And I'm just winding this with enough tension to keep it onto the bobbin, but when I let it go, it's not all going to spill off. If I'm going to tie this too tightly, you'll find that it just all bounces back. It won't help in your sewing machine at all. So just be patient with it. And just keep winding until the bobbin is completely full. I've just got a long end there. I'm going to snip that off and then carry on winding. Now your shirring elastic is available in different colours as well, so have a shop around and try to match the colour to your fabric. If you can't find exactly the same colour as your fabric, then I suggest you use a neutral colour, maybe a beige or of course a white there that I'm using here. And the best fabrics to use for this are the finer fabrics. You'll get more of a gather on fine fabrics, which again is perfect for summer dresses. So I'm going to use a little piece of polycotton gingham, which I think would make a lovely summer dress. Always do yourself a little bit of a patch test before you start as well, just to make sure that it's going to gather as you want it to gather. And there we go, and that it works, with the fabric that you're using as well. Now then, let's go over to the sewing machine. So this is going to drop into the bobbin case in just the same way as you would do with regular thread. I want you to double check though that you do get this thread around the tensions, because sometimes it can pop out. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm in the tension here, and I'm going to pull the thread up to the top. I wouldn't recommend that you use your thread snippers if you have those built into your machine. And just give that a tug, just to make sure that the tension is engaged in the bottom. As you're sewing, sometimes it happens, the elastic can pop out of the tension. So if you start to sew and things don't seem to be gathering very much, then do double check that the tension is engaged underneath here. Another couple of things to have a play with, and remember, if you're going to do your test patch first of all, play with different tensions and stitch lengths and see what kind of effects you have. So I'm going to recommend that you put the stitch length up to maybe 4.5 or 5 if your machine goes that far. Maybe a longer stitch if you've got a longer stitch on your sewing machine, and increase the tension. So increase it slightly, and if it doesn't gather enough, increase it more and more and more. The tighter the tension and the longer the stitch, the more of a gather that you're going to have. And then we'll move on to our fabric. If you're making this as a project, I suggest that you hem first, because if this was going to be the top of a little girl's dress, by the time this is all gathered, you're going to find it quite difficult to then fold the top over and hem it. So before you even start, make sure the top is hemmed. I'm using check fabric, so I've got straight lines, so I can use these lines as a guide. If you're using a plain fabric or a patterned fabric, then I suggest the first line you're going to draw with an erasable ink pen, so you have a straight line to sew along. And then subsequent rows of stitching, you can use the edge of your foot pedal as a guide so that you're stitching in straight lines. What I would suggest as well, if you're using a fabric like this, which has a check or something that has a stripe on it, you sew in rows. So you stop at the end of each row, or you can turn around and go back in the opposite direction. But if you've got a fabric which is plain or patterned, if you're making the little girl's dress again, or you're making a top for yourself, to sew the bodice together first, so you have a tube, and then you can sew round and just keep going round and round in a spiral. Now, I'm not suggesting that with a check, because the stitches will be at a very slight angle and it will stand out if you have a pattern like this. But it's only very slight, but that's a lot quicker to actually sew the shirring elastic in. But it also means that you don't have to join a seam at the back where it might be quite difficult to line up the rows of stitches. So that's just something to have a think about when you're making your garment. You can't do that on sleeves. You'll find that they're just too small to actually get into your sewing machine and sew round. But if you're making a bodice for a dress, then that's another little tip for you. Okay, so tension is up, stitch is long, and then we'll sew some stitches. The first row you sew may not look as though it's gathering very much. So it's gathering a little bit, you can see here, but it doesn't actually look as though it's gathering very much. But you'll find the more rows that you sew, the more gathered it appears to be. So I'm just going to turn around now and go back in the opposite direction, and I'm using now the side of my foot against the stitch line as my straight line. So you can see a little bit of gathering there. I don't want to be putting the fabric underneath the foot as it's gathered, because I don't want to kind of pleat it. So I'm just going to pull this open. I'm not pulling against the needle, I'm just gently pulling it open so that my stitches are going to lie flat. And again, just lining up the edge of the foot with my previous stitch line, and you'll see we start to gather a little bit more. Go back in the opposite direction again, so that's quite a nice little gather there, and we'll carry on. So we'll do a few rows like this, and then we'll see if we can encourage it to gather just a little bit more. Don't worry about the noise as well. Your machine may sound a little bit noisier with the shirring elastic in there, but that's absolutely fine and normal. So you'll get quicker and quicker as you go with this. But already you can see what a lovely effect that's having. On to the next side. I think we'll just do two more. So again, I'm just pulling away from the needle to keep the fabric flat. So we want gathers, not creases. And remember, you will run out of thread in the bobbin, so just be aware, keep checking every now and again that you are still gathering behind there. So that will do for now. So you can see that's quite a nice gather. To make it tighter, couple of options. If you've done it this way, you could actually take the end of the elastic and pull it. As I said earlier, it's quite a strong elastic, so you could kind of pull that and thread it a little bit. But what we're going to do is to give it a quick iron. So choose your iron with steam, and with your fabric from the back, let's do half of this so that you can see the effect when you use steam on the elastic. So just hover over the top, so try not to touch the elastic, and I'm just letting the steam heat up that elastic, and it'll pull it in a little bit. Obviously be aware of the fabric that you're using, so if your fabric won't take hot steam, then do be aware of that. But can you see this is shrinking, so this elastic is tighter than this elastic. Do a little bit more at the bottom here. You can see how that's working. And then let's go all the way across. So again, I'm hovering, I'm not pushing the iron, so I'm not ironing this, I'm not pressing it. I'm just hovering the steam above. So the heat from the steam and the moisture is just making the elastic contract. And it'll stay like that. So again, if you feel that you want a little bit more shrinkage, then that's the ideal thing to do. I think that's about as far as we can go with that one. And then just to show you how much that's shrunken, again, the aim is to shrink this by around about half. Let's put the ruler in there. And that elasticated bit actually measures 7 inches. And before it was 14. So that's exactly what we wanted. We wanted the whole thing. In fact, it was 15 inches and that shrunk down to 7 inches. So it shrunk down by just over half. So that's a nice bit of shirring, and that's going to be tight enough to actually support when you're wearing it as well. If you're not too sure, or if you find that shirring isn't tight enough, then there's no harm in putting a couple of straps, maybe a couple of ribbon straps on a little girl's dress that tie at the shoulders. So I hope you found that useful. Pretty with that fabric as well, isn't it? And again, not just for bodices, but that would look really pretty on the sleeve of a blouse as well. But do remember to hem it before you start sewing it. So I hope you found that useful, and again, just watch out for videos shortly, because I will try and get around to actually making the little girl's dress out of this before the summer's over. I'll see you again next time.